All right, traders, welcome to today's recap. This is Christian from Hertz Tribeca Trade Group, and it is almost 5 o'clock on Wednesday the 5th. Let me just make sure I'm recording. I am recording. And so theme of the day is Value Day. This is something that I picked up on, not too far past the open today, that really what was outperforming very well was oil and gas names, material names. You could see XME today finished. I mean, these are big numbers, right? Up 4%. XOP was up 5.5%. So this is something that we've been talking about with the energy names. Like I've been trying to field questions and try to answer them in the best manner that I can. The situation with energy names. We saw crude break down towards the end of last week, the beginning of this week. Really break down, and some of the RSIs on the energy names, got to the high teens. Like XLE, I think Exxon got to like a 18 or 19 RSI. But the issue with this for me, right? Everybody's different, so I try not to say like this could be a bad trade or that could be a bad trade. But you could see Exxon, rallying from the lows. This is kind of the thing that happens in. Just like the same thing when names go, get really overbought, like Tesla, for example, they can come in quite a bit, and this is the same thing with like a name like Exxon. Or any of the energy names. I think that they're due for a bounce. I wasn't going to try to predict it. I don't have any energy exposure, just so you know where I'm coming from. But I very much follow a trend philosophy. You can read books on trend trading. There's one called Trend Trading that's by I think Michael Covell that you can read about. But I basically just stay away from names that are in downtrends for the most part. I'm about probably 75% trend, and maybe 25% of the time I'll trade something counter trend, or probably a little bit less than that. But when these names bounce, and just like Tesla selling off when it's overbought like it did today, it could be a powerful bounce that goes on. So that's that. Also XME was up 4%. That wasn't really as oversold. I don't, for some reason I don't have RSI on my screen, but you could see that also kind of coming back and holding this support. But again, I think these personally, like these trades to me, trying to pick bottoms like this are pretty difficult. We do know that this thing is back below the 200. I did play this XME when it moved above the 200, but I got out of it pretty quickly, and I think I missed this whole move down. But material names and so forth, material names and even energy names, they can rally a little bit, but it's really difficult for these names to have sustained rallies. So again, I played a few different groups or a few different names in this group months back, but for the most part, I've been kind of moving away from banks. If you want to stick with that value move that we saw today, and by the way, this is two ETFs. One is IWD, so that's large cap value, over IWF, as in Frank, that's large cap growth. So large cap value over large cap growth, and you could do this exercise for I think it's IWO and IWN for the small caps as well. We could look at that too. But you could see how this ratio, over time, of course, with value in the numerator, it has really underperformed towards growth. Remember I tend to think that this is seasonal. Around September, October, value tends to outperform a bit. Notice it did this again in August and September of 2019, but right now it's trending lower, and you got the bounce today. So, will it be more than a 1 day phenomenon with value names outperforming? I don't have the answer to that question, but it's good to look at that relationship, because I do think there will be bouts of outperformance with growth. There will be bouts of outperformance with value, but you could see this is in a deep downtrend. So, again, it happens, but it usually resumes the downtrend, and growth usually outperforms. I could just tell you that's the relationship. So those are, other than that, home builders, which I thought were an interesting setup. I tweeted a couple home builder charts out, not last night, the night before. They didn't participate in yesterday's rally at all. They did a little bit today. So this group continues to interest me. ITB moving back up. Remember, this thing broke out and had a couple weeks of really nice outperformance. The home builders. So these things like I think DHI closed up 3.5% today. You don't hear too many people talking about that, but that's a really nice looking candle for the day. After one, two, three, four, five red candles. So pretty good performance there. So again, just different groups. So today wasn't about the software, about the internet names. Those names had a huge monster day yesterday. And it is funny how this happens because, sometimes you think names like we were going over in last night's video, like Plan. I talked about how I've been long that name in the Tribeca Trade Group tactical portfolio, but a lot of those names came smashing down. I had a couple of people ask me, they're like, what's the news in this one? What's the news in that one? It's just how these rotations happen. Can be very, in momentum and in high growth areas, you could see these names come down very, very quickly, and that's pretty crazy, right? For Plan, having a huge upside day, and then gives it all right back, down 6%. TTD was a name that we highlighted yesterday. Again, it's good to take targets. I did add to this trade today. I'm a little bit now underwater in the ad. But again, sometimes you just don't have any follow through in some areas. But again, so these things, it's really important to take targets in your trades because some of these things can give back just as quickly as they gave. So that's software. I wanted to make sure I touched that. But you could go through 20 different software names. Most of them, some even went way below where they rallied from yesterday. Also, the internet group was down about 0.75%, but sold off from where it was. So really tricky with that's the best word. I use that word a lot, tricky. But I think, if you look at the Qs and if you're loaded up in the Qs today or names and growth names, this moved down intraday, even though the whole market, S&P finished up 1.1% for the day, very strong. But again, different groups, pulled the cart today. So, there's a lot of good questions that we got in the room. One of which was, well, hey, like instead of trying to figure out these rotations that happen like this, because again they can be very fierce like they were today, and some outsized moves. So the question was, instead of trying to play these rotations, is it better just to have a diversified portfolio? Sometimes some people think that, right? If you're a little bit unclear about what sector is going to move. We've talked about this before, especially back last fall when all those sector rotations, when everything was going into value. It's like, hey, you could just hold the S&P too. When times, if you're having, if you've made money in one group and it's done very well, you don't have to keep hitting that same group because it will see rotation. You could switch to trading SPX call spreads or SPY. And again, that's why it's so difficult. That's why 80% of hedge funds cannot beat the S&P because of these types of sector rotations are really difficult, and sometimes you're just chasing areas. So what I try to do is not get way overweight one group. When I think there's one group is basically seeing new money being added to it and there's momentum to it, I will sometimes take two or three positions in that group and names. But I try not to get too crazy with adding, much more than that. Because it can get you could have some very painful days on the rotation days. And then the other thing is I really try to look for quality in different sectors, right? I know the banks have been out of favor too, and if you look at some of these charts now, JP Morgan's not a bad move. Like that's something that I will be watching for tomorrow. You almost have an MACD crossover, so if this wants to outperform a little bit, so be it. And Morgan Stanley's been a name that I've been watching too. I don't have any position in J.P. Morgan, but remember this was the best earnings out of the group. Completely gave it all back. I mean, literally gave the whole damn thing back. So it's been strong the last couple of days, and you don't hear too many people talking about the banks that have been showing strength this week. But there it is. BAC's also looks like another good one. Top of value is 35.70, which we did see some calls go up in this one. So, either if you can make these types of moves in these rotations, then that's great. And I think also your portfolio you have to be pretty nimble with making sure that you're taking off trades so that you can kind of concentrate on the next one. But of course, easier said than done. Another group that I'm looking at, which I got long today, I rebalanced the TTG tactical portfolio today. I like aerospace and defense names. They look like they could possibly be a group that just breaks out another swing up here, because this is a lot of consolidation. So I like names like UTX. I think UTX looks pretty good if you're looking for a couple single names. I just went long the ETF. We also saw some call buying in Boeing too. Remember, and Boeing is, I think, the top weight in the ITA ETF, right, which is here. This is the components of this, but this is a group that I think is pretty interesting right now. I think I like LHX as well. They just had earnings. Again, so many names are reporting earnings. It's really difficult to get your arms around a lot of these names. That some of them they kind of get lost. But I like this name too. It's just a little bit. I wouldn't mind it coming in a little bit. But I have to say, I think I like UTX out of the group. Probably LMT second, and then LHX third. Option activity for the day. I think we covered enough of the theme for the day, but I think that was basically it. Then there was a couple other groups. Biotech continues to do well. It was up 2.5% today. So it's not all value, but I think that was a lot of what happened the day's move. TXN saw some calls today. Repeat. We saw a couple names like Microchip report good numbers last night, but they came in. This is pretty big size that they came in TXN today multiple times. I didn't take this trade today. The reason being is because I already own a couple names within the group. I already own Micron, so just like I was saying, just being careful, like not to load up too much of your exposure in one group. That's why I didn't take Texas Instruments, TXN today, even though it saw a whole hell of a lot of call buying in March. Big trades today. These were like right out of the gate today at 9:47, and I think there was one before that too. Oh no, that was the first one. Over 4,000 contracts, $1.2 million trade. Then another big trade, $1 million trade as well. So maybe there was a little bit of put selling in there as well. But that's Texas Instruments. It's a name that we've seen call buying in before. So really strong there. Then going back to the banks, Schwab. I've talked about Schwab a couple times because we saw some big call buying in this name. I think it was about 3 or 4 days ago, and we saw another big block of calls today in Schwab, right at the in the last hour. It was not right at the end of the day. Boeing, I mentioned there is a little bit of calls, further dated calls out. UNH right out of the gate today. TLT calls, out of the money calls. So this is kind of interesting here. I went long. I took this trade today. So again, I try to be 100% transparent with everything that I'm doing. But I took TLT. It was down about almost 1%. It actually went down a little bit further from when I looked at this. But this is a breakout and a retest. So I'm okay with going into a little bit of bonds, something different from my portfolio, after 3 or 4 down days. And now there's a VPOC down here at 140. That would be a place that maybe I add, but that would be a pretty decent swing down. I like that we're kind of testing last week's value area. But again, I think just something a little bit different for my portfolio. You could see this is S1 pivot resistance, sorry, not resistance, support as well. So, I wouldn't mind seeing this thing maybe rally back into here for a trade. So I got long bonds for today. All right, guys, so that's it for today's video. And guys, have a great night, and I'll see you tomorrow.